Bradley Jackson with the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and thank you all for joining us. This is the second of three meetings that we're having, congressional town halls. The purpose of these is to connect businesses with our congressional leaders at the federal level and talk about how businesses have been impacted, and also hear from them about a number of things that are coming up that have been enacted or maybe coming down the road. So we really thank them for taking the time to join us today. I know that in their districts, they're extremely busy with phone calls, with questions from their constituents. So we greatly appreciate that. I do want to remind everyone that we are recording this meeting so we can share it with those of you who can't join us. We're going to automatically just mute everyone for sound quality. So if you have a question, the host, I believe is Ron King, you can either send him a question or toward the end, we'll open it up for questions. Of course, our speakers, make sure you're not muted before you begin to speak. We really appreciate all of our friends in the media. However, this meeting is not open to the press. If you do have a press or a question, please contact us at the Tennessee Chamber, info@tnchamber.org. So with that said, we will open up for some opening comments, and we'll kind of go in alphabetical order. First, it'll be Congressman Desjardins, and then Congressman Green, which Ryan has a video from Congressman Green, and then Congressman Rose. So with that said, we will go ahead and get started. I do want to say, though, on the prepared questions from across the Middle Tennessee area, we have three chambers that are joining us to ask questions. The first question will go to Matt Largent, who's President CEO of Williamson, Inc. Appreciate you all for joining us. Ryan Egley, President and CEO of the Lawrence County Chamber, and then Jordan Osborne, who's President of the Robertson County Chamber. So with that said, Congressman Desjardins, we'd love to hear any thoughts you've got, things you're hearing, how your district is being impacted, and maybe some of the most frequent calls or questions you're getting from the business community.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to, Bradley, and I appreciate you and appreciate the chamber for putting this together. This is a unprecedented time for all of us, and of course, I was a family practice doctor before going to Congress, and so dealt with pandemics and flu viruses and things year in, year out. And we had the swine flu in 2009. I was still practicing at the time, and we had 13,000 deaths at that time, but certainly none of what has happened this time around was going on then. This is a different creature, and we're learning about it as we go. But I'd have to think, I wasn't alive in World War II, but I don't think the country has taken these kind of measures probably since wartime 80 years ago. So none of us really know exactly how to respond to this. It's so unusual and so unprecedented. They're having curfews in towns in Tennessee. In my district, I have different places where you can't go into a grocery store, but maybe one person out of a family can go in, and the Walmarts are kind of blocked off as you come through the door and limit who goes in, who goes out. Some states are limiting what you can buy when you do go into a grocery store or Walmart. Like they determine what's essential and non-essential. I've seen reports of blocking off sporting goods, gardening areas, and things like that. So it's a lot for people to digest, but more importantly, people just suddenly were told not to come to work. If you're in the restaurant industry, entertainment industry, any of those types of things, don't report to work. You're non-essential and you can't be open. So obviously, it's a very frightening time for all of us, and a lot of this we're learning as we go. John Rose and Mark Green, and yesterday we were on with the East Tennessee Congressman. And we stay in close touch with the government. John and I just hopped off a call with Secretary Sonny Perdue and our leadership, trying to update us on a USDA perspective. And actually, I think we had a concomitant call with Governor Lee. He's been doing weekly press conferences as well. And I know I wasn't able to make that one, but it's just a series of doing work differently. We're doing our work by phone. So, this is appropriate that we're doing this today to try to answer some of the questions, but I certainly appreciate the Chamber's leadership in stepping up and doing this. Tennessee 4, we're not terribly hard hit by the virus. I think statewide we're a little over 3,000 cases and 79, maybe 80 deaths. So we're fortunate in Tennessee not to be hit as hard as other places, but we're prepared. I don't think we should fear this virus, but we need to respect it, and I think people are doing that. And under the president's leadership, I think that we're going to see this thing contained. I would guess that there's going to be a high death toll, the 2,000 range for the next several days, but I would expect that to start tapering off. And I think it's going to be important that we try to reopen the economy as soon as we can. But I do think that we'll see a flattening of the curve of new cases, so the social distancing is probably working. But we're going to have to look forward to the future and see how we handle this type of thing when it comes around again, and it will. And so this is going to be a great social experiment, and we will be armchair quarterbacking this one for months and years to come. I'm sure there's things we've done wrong. Hopefully there's things we've done right. But today, we want to try to be here to help shed light on some of the concerns and questions affecting small businesses. So I'll turn it over to my good friend John Rose, and I'll let him make some comments about what's going on in his area.
Congressman, I believe you're muted.
Yeah, just give me a second. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Well, good afternoon to everyone on this call, and thank you for taking time out today to join us. As many of you know, I'm a freshman in Congress, took office last January 3rd, and come to the Congress as a first-time elected official, first time in the Congress, of course, but I come from a long history in small business. And so as a small businessman, I feel like I can, not so recently removed from that environment, I feel like I am maybe in a good position to understand what many of you that are on this call today may be experiencing. I just want to begin by saying that my staff and I have remained, just as you've heard from Congressman Desjardins, we've stayed in touch with our leaders in Washington, staying abreast of the information that they have, but also in touch with the governor here in Tennessee and with our local and county officials all across the 6th District, small business people and bankers in particular. And so my office is, and my staff is ready to assist you if you're experiencing issues in interacting with the federal government anyway and in navigating many of the programs that have been put in place in recent days. If you're having trouble, I hope you'll feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do everything we can to help you understand the programs and help you navigate participation in those. It's also, I've found, very useful to hear the experience you're having so that we understand what small businesses are experiencing. One of the things that I've learned in the Congress is that very often the way that we operate as members of Congress, there were 535 of us, counting the House and the Senate. And so one of the ways that we communicate your needs to the administration is through letters that we send to the various agencies to communicate difficulties that you're having, to champion issues that we feel like need to be brought to the fore. And so during this time, I and your other members on the call today have been doing that, and obviously in telephone calls and also through letters, trying to communicate those needs. And so one of the things that I have done is to reach out to Secretary Azar and the Department of Health and Human Services to request that they prioritize our rural hospitals as they think about implementing the programs that the Congress has enacted and trying to make sure that we get the help that our rural hospitals need. Secondly, many of you, particularly if you're in the banking industry or if you're a small business, you may have heard of the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm privileged to serve on the House Financial Services Committee, and so this has been a particular area of focus for me and our staff, is to help our bankers in Tennessee and our small businesses that are attempting to access this program through the banks to navigate those waters. I will tell you that as I have been working with that issue and all of these issues, I'm reminded of a quote that's often attributed to Winston Churchill, and I thought it might be appropriate to share that with you today. And as I checked to make sure this was in fact an appropriately attributed to Winston Churchill, I looked it up, and so there's some, I think, ambiguity about who maybe deserves credit for this. But the quote is, "Americans can always be trusted to do the right thing once all other possibilities have been exhausted." And I I don't say that to be critical of anyone in our government, but I will say that this time where we, as Congressman Desjardins has already pointed out, are undertaking extraordinary measures to try to keep the American economy thriving, I think points out the value of our free enterprise system in this country. I can assure you that while all of us involved in the federal government are going to do our very best to help alleviate the harm from this healthcare crisis, there is no group of smart people in Washington, there's no group of smart people in Nashville who can better organize our economy and better organize our way of life than individuals making responsible decisions themselves. And so I think we have to be careful as a country that as we look to address the problems, that we don't throw out the values and the system that have served us so well. Very often we see that America, sometimes we may be a little bit slow to react, but normally at the end of the day, our reactions tend to best accommodate the challenges that face us. And I think that will be true here. Obviously, extraordinary times, the government is attempting to take extraordinary measures to deal with these times. But in the end, we're going to rely on the American people, the American small business person to make good, competent decisions that are going to help us as a country navigate through this and I think come out stronger for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And now we'll pull up the video from Congressman Mark Green. Ryan's going to do that. And subsequent, I will kind of turn over to Ryan to facilitate questions.
Hey, this is Congressman Mark Green, and I want to say to the chambers all across the state of Tennessee, thank you for your service to our great state and our communities and the businesses within them. This has been a tough experience, basically going to a full stop on our entire economy. And as we start to think about how we're going to get out of this, that's going to take some real planning, both at the national, the state, but also at the local and the community level. We're going to need chambers of commerce in small towns to connect with their business community and of course, plan out the strategy of reopening our economy. This has been a difficult time. There are some bad weeks yet to come in terms of, the expected load, and of course, tragically, there will be probably more deaths here in the coming weeks. But it's important that we stick together, and we will get through this. We are the volunteer state, and there is no doubt in my mind that within a very brief period of time, this economy is going to come back roaring, and we will be, killing it once again. You guys have a great rest of your day. Again, thank you for what you do as a chamber and what you mean to both the businesses that are out there being a part and running and fueling and being the engine of this economy, as well as the employees and the workers who find work and worth from those jobs that are created. Thank you and have a great day.
Well, thanks, Bradley, and thanks to the three of our congressional members here. We, like Bradley mentioned earlier in the call, we do have three chamber leaders who are prepared to ask some previously prepared questions to you guys, and thanks to them for jumping on this call and what they mean to their communities. Our first one, Matt, is from Williamson Inc. Matt Largent is the president and CEO at Williamson Inc. in Franklin. Matt, if you can unmute your line and go right ahead, you'll be live.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Ryan. I appreciate that. And thanks everybody for being on the call today. Appreciate the good words. Just wanted to start by saying we've been surveying our businesses from the beginning of this pandemic, and not been any big surprises in the numbers we've got. A lot of people cited rent relief as a potential option. A lot of people are looking for sales tax relief from the state. Overwhelmingly revenue loss, especially in small business. So we know the small businesses have been hit hard and hit first. And I will say one of the things we've noticed in the last few days is an increasing sense of desperation from our small business community because of what's already been mentioned. We don't know how long this is going to last, but we did notice definitely a tonal change in some of those reactions over the last couple of days. And I just want to thank Congress for the work that you all have done with the Families First and the CARES Act. We've been promoting this PPP program incredibly hard, trying to encourage people to talk to their lenders, get information ready. Really, this seems like the best avenue. So, Congressman, could you talk about what the most valuable provisions of this act are for businesses and individuals? And then how can we as Chambers of Commerce help our residents and our businesses access these programs?
Ryan, I didn't know, did you want me to go first? This is Congressman Desjardins.
No, yes, sir. Please feel free to.
Okay, well, Matt, thank you so much for all you do, and thank you for that question. And certainly one of the small business is hard enough, and having this kind of uncertainty in small business can certainly cause a lot of heartburn and anxiety. And, you know, I think that the CARES Act was a quick response. It was an imperfect response, but it had to happen quickly, and not everything was done as we'd like it to be done, but that's the way the nature of emergencies. But, you know, a couple of things that it does to help people out of the gate is it delays the tax filing. You didn't have to have your tax filed, or you don't have to have filed on April 15th. That's been pushed back till July 15th. We've got rebate money coming out. I know for small business owners, that's not a big help, but for a lot of the employees, the $1,200 for individual, $2,400 for couple, and then there's $500 for each qualifying dependent. So that money should be showing up here shortly. We're on a call with Secretary Mnuchin, and if you file your taxes and the IRS has a direct deposit bank number, you should be seeing these checks as early as next week. So for people making up to $75,000 of single filer, $1,200 could be showing up next week. For couples, $2,400, and then additional $500 per eligible dependent. Now there are cutoffs. If you're a couple and you make over $150,000, that number decreases by 5% per thousand, up to $200 where it fades out. But this will impact most people. So that money is on the way. And now that we're a couple weeks into this, and paychecks have stopped, and that should give a little bit of help to some folks. But the Paycheck Protection Program certainly is a godsend, and most small businesses don't carry enough in capital to make payroll much beyond 1 or 2 pay periods, let alone other expenses. So as of last Friday, the bank started processing these loans. I think as of today, $110 billion has been processed and is on the way out the door. You know, certainly some hiccups early on Friday and then through the weekend, but they continue to shore up the program and get clarity to the banks so these loans can go out. But we call them loans, but the small business owners are using this for payroll or interest payments or mortgage or rent or utilities. It becomes a grant and it doesn't have to be paid back. So it literally should save a lot of small businesses. And there's questions. I know John gets them and Mark gets them. We all get them daily. I wake up with numerous text messages and emails every morning, and that goes on through the day. And, there's a lot of questions about this, understandably. I hate to say they have to make some of it up as they go, but, they find glitches and problems as they go. So, we were told yesterday that they're updating the treasury.gov and the SBA.gov sites hourly. There's frequently asked questions. Yours is probably on there. So even if you've looked before and you have questions about the processing of the loans, how to get it, how much you can get, what it can be used for, SBA.gov or Treasury.gov should have answers to a lot of those. It waives 10% penalty on early withdrawal of retirement accounts. There's student loan relief. There's $454 billion emergency lending to businesses, states, and cities through the Treasury Exchange Stabilization Fund. A lot of support for hospitals and first responders. So there's many good things in here. There's going to be more to come today on the Senate floor. They were trying to get more money into the payment protection plan because it's going out the door so fast or accounted for. They wanted to do a UC to have an additional $250 billion ready. There was an objection by someone in the Senate, and I know Nancy Pelosi in the House is wanting to double that and add other things. So unfortunately, I think that backup money is probably going to be delayed at least into next week. Hopefully that will be okay. I know the president wants this out quicker, but I think the thing we can do most is give small businesses the reassurance that, they're in this predicament due to no fault of their own. The federal government has mandated these things, and we want them to know that that we're going to be there for them. We're going to do our best to keep them afloat, and the chamber is obviously going to have a critical role in helping share information and pass this along. And I'll stop and let John add to that. But there's a lot of good things in there. There's a lot of things that we need to do better, and hopefully we can correct those in upcoming legislation.
Thank you, Scott. Scott has covered a lot there with what he said, but it may be helpful for me to back up and just kind of lay out the structure of the government response in terms of the Congress's response. So there have been 3 phases of legislation that have passed. The first phase 1 legislation was essentially just a budget of supplemental that allowed money for the healthcare response that needed to get underway very early. It was about $8.3 billion. So I'm just going to kind of put this in terms of the money that's been appropriated or allocated for this. The second bill that we took up was the Families First bill, which then tried to deal with some of the problems that were emerging with and were anticipated with respect to people losing their jobs and having to file for unemployment, expanding those benefits, creating medical leave, and providing a facility for small businesses to be able to afford that. The price tag for that bill, Families First, ended up being is estimated to be about $100 billion. And then finally, the phase 3 legislation, which everyone refers to as the CARES Act, which is $2.3 trillion. You add all that up, it's a little over 2.4 billion or 2.4 trillion. I think it's remarkable because you compare that to the outstanding debt of the nation prior to this crisis, which was about 24 trillion. So we're going to add about 10% to the national debt, at least, based on just the legislation that's already passed. I say that not to make people feel bad, but to just kind of put in perspective the magnitude of the response that the federal government is trying to put out there. Obviously, our healthcare professionals have told us that we need to essentially provide social distancing, and in an attempt to do that, we've largely shut down the economy. I'm kind of reminded of the title of an old novel some of you have probably read. It begins with the words, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." We came into this crisis with arguably maybe the strongest economy in the history of the country, which is a good thing, and we hope will help us get through this. We now may be, at least for all of us living, perhaps in the worst of times, and that is remarkable. So how do we navigate through this? Obviously, all of these programs, and Scott did a good job of going through some of the details of them, are there to try to keep the American economy, I guess, functioning as best as possible, or on life support, you might say, while we get through the crisis of the healthcare of the virus itself. The hope is that then we are able to revive the economy fairly quickly, and that's what all of these programs at one level or another are aimed at doing. We don't want businesses to disband. We don't want them to become insolvent and shut down. We don't want institutions and public service organizations to have to disband during this time. And so that's what all of these programs are aimed at doing. We can certainly get into a lot of the details. I will tell you, it has been remarkable what the government has done in the very short time that it's done it. It has not been perfect. It will not be perfect. There are lots of frustrations. There will no doubt be lots of things as we look back on this down the line that didn't get done well, or that could have been done far better. And so we need to just be mindful of that. I think be patient as people, be patient with one another, and know that the people that are responsible for trying to implement these programs are doing the very best they can. it's very frustrating if you're not getting the answers that you need in a timely manner, and it's very frustrating when you see disparities in how these programs are being rolled out. But it is nothing more than nothing short of a Herculean task to try and do all of these things in a very short period of time. And obviously it's the government doing them, and we all know that the government very often is not very efficient. So I think Scott covered a lot of the details. Perhaps in some of the remaining questions, we can get deeper into questions and concerns that people have about specific programs and their implementation. I will just say one last thing about the Paycheck Protection Program that I know many people have been trying to wrestle with in recent days, and bankers in particular, but small businesses who've been trying to avail themselves of that particular program. In my personal opinion, we probably got out the door a little bit too quick. And so there were lots of unanswered questions. Slowly, it seems, if you're on the front lines and dealing with these problems, those questions are coming into play, or those answers to those questions are coming into place. And so we hope that that program is going to accomplish its purpose. As Scott indicated, it is my understanding now that loans are actually, or funds are actually being dispensed by lenders. Essentially, the federal government has engaged all of the financial institutions that it can, and working with all the ones that haven't yet been able to try to get them equipped to participate so that their customers can avail themselves of this program. We hope that to the extent that fund, which was originally $350 billion, we hope that to the extent that it is exhausted in the days ahead, that we're going to be able to add funding to that program so that no one gets left out. As Scott indicated, unfortunately, right now, there are some folks in the Congress that are trying to game that situation. So right now, even though the other programs have not run out of money and are not in danger of running out of money, that program, which is being subscribed to very quickly, we don't want it to run out of money because we don't want anyone to be turned away. And so that's where the narrow spot on the road we think may first appear, and we're trying to alleviate that. And so we hope that we can prevail upon enough of the members of Congress, and particularly in the other party, who are trying to use this occasion to as leverage to get other programs funded that are not yet out of funds or have not been addressed. So that's really kind of where we are with that particular program. And with that, I'll wait for the next question. Thank you.
Thanks to you both. Very helpful, very insightful responses there. And I will remind everyone who is connected with us here. If you go to the chat window, it'll be at the bottom of your screen, and just send any questions to the host, which will come to us, and we'll try to get those answered at the end of the call. Our next question will be from Ryan Egley. Ryan's the president and CEO of the Lawrence County Chamber. Ryan, you should be live. Just go right ahead and make sure you're unmuted.
Hey, Ryan, can you hear me?
We've got you. Go right ahead. Thanks, Ryan.
Hey, fantastic. And Bradley, Ryan, and the Tennessee Chamber team, thank you for this opportunity just to interface with our congressman. And to our congressman, thank you for your quick action. It's noticed and it's appreciated by our small businesses. As Matt mentioned just a moment ago, a lot of our small businesses here in Lawrenceburg and Lawrence County, they are suffering quite a bit. In fact, I'll tell you just a quick story about a business owner here named Jeff that I spoke with last night. And his primary business is wrapping boats for bass tournaments. So a lot of professional fishermen, and it's a big industry here in Tennessee. He just finished all of those wraps for this season, and all the tournaments are now canceled. And now he's looking forward to next year. And it looks like they're going to be keeping the same wraps. Therefore, we're talking about his business being affected not only today with other contracts, but even a year from now as he moves into the next season. So my question to you is, what are some of the next steps you foresee Congress taking to assist in alleviating pressures put on our nation, and specifically our small businesses and people like Jeff, by the pandemic?
Yeah, Ryan, that's a great story and a great example of the challenges that we're going to face, because every small business is different, and small business isn't just a widget that you wind up and let go, and then when it stops you set it aside and rewind it. It's like a snowball going down a hill. It gains steam as it goes, and you can't just rebuild it from scratch as soon as we turn the switch back on. And so, those are problems that we need to take into account. Right now, what Congressman Rose just suggests is we want to make sure that there's access to money, the additional funds that we're attempting to appropriate, because we are fairly certain that what's been allocated in the $350 billion will probably run out sooner than later, and we want to make sure that we can keep people afloat. But the problem you just described is one that that can't necessarily be remedied by the plan that's currently in place. And so we're going to have to be flexible, and we're going to have to learn how to cope with those. It may be in the form of bridge loans at low interest, and certainly I think the president's been talking about reopening the economy as soon as possible. I don't think that's going to be, again, like flipping a switch. There's hot spots around the country where the virus is inflicting much more damage than others. In Tennessee, we're, I dare to say, relatively unaffected, knock on wood, and there's certainly other states around the country. And the problem with the federal government has always been it likes to be a one-size-fits-all. And I think that we're going to have to look at this rationally in areas where there's not as much risk. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to reopen economies as we go. And frankly, I really worry about the precedent this has set. We went from, as John said, this booming economy with record low unemployment, it's lowest unemployment since 1969, and now we're looking at a projected unemployment of 15% here by the end of the quarter, approaching numbers that we saw in the Great Depression. So we went from a problem not having enough workers to fill all the jobs to now all these unemployed workers, and we've got unemployment set up for a couple of months. There's an unemployment boost of $600, but that helps the people that are unemployed. But these businesses are going to require a lot of attention, and I think really what Congress needs to do moving forward is listen to stories like what you just said. And I don't know if the call was set up for this, Bradley, but a lot of the dialogue we've been having back and forth, we get briefed by our leadership, or yesterday Vice President Pence and Mnuchin. We kind of get one-sided conferences where they're telling us this is how things are going, and they think they're going pretty well. I think that the rollout that they did Friday and the corrections they made through the weekend and the money they're able to get out now has really been pretty miraculous. But it's such a broad and complicated scope that a lot of people are going to slip through the cracks. So, we ask questions and we try to give feedback from what we're hearing from folks like you and our business people. But I know for me it's helpful to hear stories like you just told. And I think John alluded to the fact that the government, there's not a whole bunch of smart people up there that can do things better than all of you out there on the ground. And so it's going to require a cooperation between the two of us, where you're communicating your needs to us, and our job is to represent that. So, I mean, if somehow in this call we can get more stories like that and more concerns, because we'll say, well, we think things are going pretty well, but you may be in an area that things aren't going worth a damn. And, we need to know where the problems are in order to fix them. And I tell my wife every day, we wake up to brush fires everywhere, and we try to put those out through the day. So, if it's possible that Congressman Rose and I can get some feedback from you all when we get to that part of the, question and answer section, that would be helpful to me. But, it's going to be a matter of listening, working together, reopening the economy where we can as soon as possible, and then providing support for these small businesses, probably for a year, maybe years to come, to fix this big void that's been created.
And I appreciate the question too, and I think Representative Desjardins has touched on something that I would just want to press down on, and that is, and I don't say this not to be helpful to the example that you gave, because I think we do need to hear those examples, and as best we can fashion a federal response to help as broadly as possible. I think we will be committed to doing so. Obviously, no one created this virus, I don't believe, and certainly not the resulting crisis that's come from it with the intent of causing difficulty for the economy. So we're all in this together, and the question is, how do we recover our economy as quickly as possible, and how do we alleviate the harm that's been done by this crisis? The federal government's not going to have all the answers, even if you share those stories with us. And I would just kind of stress, this is what makes this country great. We're not waiting on central planners for the most part to come up with the solutions to how we survive as individuals, how we prosper as businesses. And I think that's why this country will bounce back. If we stick to those principles, I think we'll bounce back in better health than most economies around the world. So I would just say, if you're a small businessman out there and your business has been disrupted by this, you need to put you need to roll out that great American ingenuity, and you need to start thinking now, what can I do? What opportunities does this situation create? And there are going to be many. For example, I suspect in the weeks ahead, in the months ahead, as we get out of this crisis, we're going to see the American supply chain reorient with a lot of supplying of that critical goods coming back onshore to North America and to the United States, because we simply can't put ourselves in the position that we found ourselves in here, where we're reliant on countries that we can't depend on to supply us for critical products when these types of emergencies come along. And so that's going to create tremendous economic opportunity across the U.S. Business landscape. And I think small businessmen are just going to have to be very agile, as they're used to being, and try to spot those opportunities and figure out where they are going to be and supply solutions, whether it be products or services that meet those needs. As for the federal government, I think the goal, as we look forward and we start to think about, as businesses begin to reopen, as the economy begins to rev back up, the goal is going to be, how do we give business people, our institutions, how do we give them the tools so that they're not deterred in their ability to rev back up, to bring people back on board. Obviously, a lot of the programs that have been put in place are trying to, I guess, if you will, preserve relationships, to preserve employment relationships, et cetera, so that hopefully the economy can regenerate more quickly. The example that you gave, I think, is going to be one of those that's particularly hard for us to fashion a federal solution that's going to solve that problem. And so, for that particular situation and others like it, I think, having that person be able to take advantage of some of these programs that are stopgap programs like Paycheck Protection Plan is the first answer. The second answer is, I believe that we'll see a whole raft of additional programs to provide business people with access to liquidity and credit, so that they can maybe sustain themselves through the trail of this crisis and keep their businesses active. But ultimately, it's going to, to everyone out there, whether you're a small business person, whether you're an independent contractor, whether you work in public service in some way, like our chambers of commerce, you're going to have to be very creative here in helping to fashion a path forward for your institution and for your organization. And then, Scott has said it, I have said it, letting us know and letting our staffs know what the problems are so that we can address them. In Washington, if you're like me, it's a little frustrating to listen to some of the press conferences because they're so positive, and they perhaps at times overstate the assistance that's actually gotten out onto Main Street. I grimace about that. I will just say, I think the intention is right to try to get help to folks as quickly as possible, even if the execution sometimes is a little bit slow to follow through on that. So there is an overwhelming effort that's being made. And at the end of the day, your questions and the examples that you give us and the problems that you point us to is the best way to solve those problems.
Thanks to each of you for your responses there. Our next question actually comes from the northern part of Middle Tennessee. Jordan Osborne, who's the president of the Robertson County Chamber. Jordan, you're on. Just make sure you unmute your line.
I did. Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to echo what Matt and Ryan said. to the Tennessee State Chamber, and obviously to our congressman for taking time to speak with us today. Congressman Rose, I think you answered this question, but I also just want to thank you for having the rural hospitals on your radar. That's an incredibly large percentage of our local economy, and very important to our community. So thank you for having that on your radar. I look forward to seeing what comes down the line to support them. However, my question is, in the near future, businesses will be looking to ways to move forward, reopening and normalizing operations. Do you have any insight that may be used as the businesses begin to turn their attention to that?
Yeah, Jordan, this is Scott Desjardins. Yeah, I think both John and I probably touched upon that a little bit. It's hard to have a crystal ball and see in the future. We don't know when this is going to happen. Obviously, sooner would be better. And, like I said, if we can begin to reopen the economy, at least in segments moving forward, I think that'll give clarity. But most people who go into business and are successful do this because of innovative ideas that they have. And so I'm sure, I've talked to several businessmen now that have been through crisis created by this, but certainly other crises in the past, and they sit and think, okay, well, how do we adjust to what's going on? The trade agreements probably were a good example of the different tariffs and whatnot that were in place with China, and even waiting on the Mexico-Canada thing. A lot of businesses had to adapt and adjust and find new avenues and ways to generate income. And I worry about employees that may leave, be on unemployment for 2 months, maybe go somewhere else. So I think that we've got to anticipate that there's going to be some turnover. You're not going to probably retain people in some areas, in some industries. I think about people that were in food service that were maybe waiters or waitresses, and they relied on tips plus their income, and they're probably getting some assistance that doesn't match that. So I think we need to anticipate that there's going to be a change in what our workforce actually looks like. And I don't know exactly what the solution is going to be, but I think people should be thinking about that. There's a lot of good jobs, or at least with the way the economy was, there was a need for employees in so many different industries, and I think that's going to happen again quickly once we ramp back up. But in some areas, quicker than others. You don't just retake vacations. You don't take 3 vacations because you didn't get to take the one now and the one later this summer. So, certain industries are going to be harder, but I think we got to rely on the entrepreneurial spirit of the American worker and businessman to come up with solutions for this. And our job in Congress is going to be to do the things that we spoke about maybe on the previous question: be there, listen, hear the complaints and concerns, and come up with innovative ways to tackle these problems. But there's no doubt there's going to be unusual problems that we haven't seen before, but I have a lot of faith in American business, and I have faith in the chamber to be there to help. So, don't have a crystal ball, but I remain optimistic that we're going to get through this sooner than later, and we'll try to do our part to be supportive.
Just echo a lot of what Representative Desjardins has said there, and I think I probably answered your question in my answer to the previous question to some degree, or at least my thoughts on it. But I would just say, we pride ourselves in having a free enterprise economy, and it has served this country well. It's created the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and the greatest standard of living of any people in the history of the world, the greatest access to goods and services, the cheapest, most reliable, safest supply of food in the history of mankind. And so all of these things we still have, and we don't need to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater here as we fashion a response to this. So, my goal will be to help alleviate the damage from this crisis and foster a return to a thriving economy that we had just prior to the event happening. But I don't think I can overstate the degree to which this crisis is going to create opportunity all across the economy for businesses large and small, for individuals who are able to spot places where the economy broke down first, where businesses were unable to continue to operate. And so this is, out of adversity comes the chance to really innovate and improve things. And so we've seen a lot of opportunities. Just as we're participating on this conference call today, I mean, this capability has existed. It's a little awkward for most of us to meet this way. We like to be face to face, and we feel more comfortable that way. And there are probably opportunities that exist around this for how we organize ourselves, how we go about doing business, how we make ourselves most efficient, and how we build an economy that can better react to challenges like the one that we have now. And certainly, I think a lot of businesses out there probably will see the opportunity to help react to the next crisis like this that comes along. We hope it's a long time off. Obviously, it had been 100 years since we had a health crisis that looked anything like the one that we're facing right now. And so I think that's the real answer, is how do you evolve your business coming out of this crisis to take advantage of the needs that are out there, to respond to them, and how to, and certainly there are going to be some businesses that don't survive. And frankly, that destructive innovation it's no consolation if you're on the receiving end of that, right? I mean, if your business goes away or it's so damaged that it can't survive through this period, that's very tough medicine. But that's the miracle of a free economy, is that we try not to keep things around that are not working. And the market does that for us. We don't have to make arbitrary decisions. Again, there doesn't have to be, and there isn't, I can assure you, some smart group of people in Washington that are going to figure all this out. The way we figure it out is by individuals out there individually deciding, here's how I respond, here's how my business is going to respond, and then those collective decisions start to mount up to start to guide us into what the best decision is. That's the beauty and the marvel of the American system. And so I think it will serve us well here. I think we got to be careful not to stand in its way. So one thing I would say to you is it's very tempting to take advantage of every federal program that's out there, and I'm not discouraging people from doing so. But I think this is the time when I would call on people to be mindful that there are maybe businesses that need that assistance more than you do. And so if you don't need it, then maybe you shouldn't avail yourself of it. If you're an individual who can go back to work, that's what we want you to do. And these programs are not meant to, dissuade people from getting back into the economy when the time comes. And so helping us spot those problems and eliminate them so that we are not keeping a kind of a foot on the brake of the American economy as we come out of this, I think that's going to be helpful too. So if you see areas where you think the programs and the response that we've already put in place are slowing down the recovery, let us know about those things, and perhaps we'll be able to alleviate them. I guess I would just stress, as you think about, you've obviously got two congressmen on this call. Congress is not the answer to everything. And so don't think that we're somehow going to just wave a magic wand and solve all the problems, because we're absolutely not. We're trying to do everything we can and help alleviate the harm that's come from this crisis. But in the end, we're going to be looking to the American free enterprise system to solve this problem, and to you as individuals who are on this call, making smart decisions for your businesses and organizations to get the country back on its feet. Thank you.
And we've had a really great discussion here, and thank you for that. We do have a little bit of time for some questions from those who have joined us here. And our first one is actually something that you are both very, very qualified to answer. Congressman Desjardins, you and your service on the Ag Committee will help you with this next question. And Congressman Rose, obviously with your background in agriculture and that being part of actually what you do for a living. So our first question is from actually Tennessee Farm Bureau Federation, Kevin Hensley. Kevin, if you will unmute your line, you should be ready to go.
Thank you, Ryan. And I'll echo what Ryan was saying, that I want to thank both the congressmen for their continued support of the agriculture community. Both of you get to know or know very well that agriculture, especially in the rural areas, is the underpinning to the entire economy and is vital to all of Tennessee. So first, really a statement, and then more of a request instead of a question. The statement being that whatever comes of the CARES Act 4.0 or 5.0, whatever we're calling it now, that we remember the agriculture community. We've been in communication with USDA already, and they're indicating to us that the funding that was in the CARES Act probably is not going to cover all the requests that are being made by the industry. So keep that in mind as y'all head back up there at some point. And then the request is all the guidance that and FAQs that the SBA has been putting out for the PPP program is great for a lot of businesses out there. I think, unfortunately, though, that a lot of that guidance doesn't fit the model for self-employed people like farmers. So any advice or pressure you might be able to put on SBA to help for self-employed individuals to navigate the application process would be beneficial. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Kevin. And then first, let me thank Tennessee Farm Bureau. They are great partners for us in Congress and such a great resource. When they said it was someone from Tennessee Farm Bureau, I was expected to hear Donna Rose, and I was thinking, okay, this thing's rigged. But I know John's got a direct line to Radonna, and frankly, I actually have for years too. And we certainly appreciate all the fine work that you guys do there at the Farm Bureau. Interesting enough, right before John and I jumped on this call, we had a call with Secretary Perdue, and there are glaring deficiencies in these first stimulus bills in terms of agriculture. So we spent quite a bit of time today sharing concerns from the ag community around the country, whether it's 1099 self-proprietors and whatnot having access to the type of loans that small businesses do and have, and there's certainly gaps there. And I think that there have been at least 20 members I heard speak up with various concerns from the agriculture community around the country. So I know Secretary Perdue was hearing us loud and clear, and we're looking to find solutions for that. So I would agree with you. I think that that wasn't included adequately, but I would guarantee you that a lot of noise is being made, as it should be. And so I think moving forward, we're going to see better solutions and better inclusion. And I know John is tied in directly there too. So I'll let him jump in, and then I may jump back in. But go ahead, John.
Thank you, Scott, and Kevin. Good question. One of the things that's been most frustrating to me is this question of whether and to the extent that farmers could participate in paycheck protection, and that's one of the things that I think has still not been adequately addressed. I think the intent of the CARES Act was to let farmers participate, but as the implementation was unfolding, we've kind of gone back and forth on the extent to which farmers are able to participate. The legislation, I was just on a conference call this morning with members of the Financial Services Committee, and we believe it was our intent and that 1099 folks would be able to be counted by the small businesses, and unfortunately that's not the way the implementation has gone, and so that's created a hiccup. And obviously the 1099 self-employed folks have been kind of held back in terms of applying. I think they're supposed to be able to start accessing the Paycheck Protection Program later this week. But that's probably not a fully adequate solution. So I think there are a lot of those kinds of problems where there's been uneven application of the programs that have already been put in place that we're going to have to try to rectify. Unfortunately, as we've already seen, providing additional funding for some of these programs is going to get caught up into politics, and there's just really no way around that. Frankly, that's part of the American process. Again, part of the reason I would tell you not to rely entirely on Congress to provide solutions to these problems. Your question as it pertains to agriculture, obviously there was significant funding in the CARES Act for agriculture. I know the Secretary and the Department have been working with the various commodity groups all across the country and the various different sectors of agriculture to try to figure out how to best apply those funds that have already been allocated to best respond to the issues that farmers uniquely are facing. Obviously, the damage to agriculture has not been even, and not surprisingly, as it has not evenly affected other areas of the economy. But needless to say, there's been real harm in certain segments already, and perhaps will be longer-term harm in other areas. And so we've got a lot to work through. Organizations like the Chambers and like the Farm Bureau are very important in helping to advance where those needs are and helping us address them and identify them, and help us think about and fashion appropriate responses, both in terms of new legislation that's coming down the pike, but also in terms of helping to push the agencies, the departments, the bureaucracy, if you will, to correctly apply the resources that we've already given them. And so very good questions. I don't have all the answers, to be sure. I don't think anyone does. And so it's just going to require vigilance on all of our parts to make sure that we get the relief to the places where it's needed most. So keep advocating for those things and making people like Scott and I aware of where the needs are most severe.
Thanks. And gentlemen, we've got two really good questions, and we're very short on time. So we'll try to get through those as quickly as we can and be respectful of your time. Our next question actually comes from Tom Grosco, who is leadership of a small business called Smelter Service in actually southern Murray County. Tom, if you will unmute your line and ask your question.
Yes, Ryan, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
Congressman, thank you very much for being on this call with us, and thank you very much for getting the CARES Act approved as quickly as you did. As you both talked about, there was some give and take to get that CARES Act approved, and I understand that completely. One of the concerns we have, we are an essential employer, and we're doing our best to keep folks working during this crisis. But we are getting a little bit of grief from our workforce about this new unemployment boost. I think it comes out to if our employees were off unemployed, they would make $21.88 an hour. The federal supplement is $600, and we add that on to the Tennessee max of $275, and it comes out to about $21.88 an hour. So we're concerned about an incentive for folks not to work. And first of all, some grief we're getting back from some of the employees about it. Two is can we stay fully staffed during this period? And three, as the economy surely will come back, as you two have both said, will we be able to, we had an extremely tight labor supply beforehand when the economy was booming. And if it booms again, we may have another competitor out there for a tight labor supply and envision real difficulties. So is there a way to measure any collateral damage from this unemployment boost? And what is there that you two can do to perhaps not to get an automatic extension beyond July 31st, like I understand some folks want to put into the next version of the CARES Act? Thank you.
Tom, thank you. And I've had the pleasure of visiting your business and know what great work you do there. It's been a few years, but it was fun to watch. But no, I absolutely share your concern. I know Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott, two senators from South Carolina, were trying to block this when it started. I've actually run into that around here and know some people personally that are actually making a little more on unemployment than they did at their job. And the last thing we need to do is, create a dependency. And that's certainly a fear. That was one of the things that, we kind of had to suck up and take when we were trying to get this through in a hurry. And it seems like there should have been a clause not to exceed your current salary, because the last thing we need to do in this country is disincentivize work. I agree with you that if we move forward with further legislation, that's a glitch that needs to be fixed. I call it a glitch. I guess if you're the person receiving that, it's kind of nice and you like it, but that's not what we're designed to do. John brought up just briefly there that there's some businesses that are essential and are still working, and their employees are still there, and they're accessing these programs when really their business isn't affected. And so we don't need that happening, but we also don't need to be creating a dependency state. They wanted to add a kind of a offbeat example where they were adding back into the SNAP program where we've made cuts, and everyone knows of abuses in the SNAP program. Most of it goes to where it's supposed to, but there's abuses there, and we all know, we've all seen it. There's going to be abuses to this program too. So I think we need to do a better job and take care as we do phase 4 of the recovery bills that are coming forward, and pay attention to things like this. But I share your concern. I absolutely do. I don't know that I have an answer to it. Maybe John has something to add to it, but I think it's a great point and something that needs to be fixed.
I think Scott's probably said it all. This is part of the give and take that unfortunately you see happen in Congress. If you watch the news, you see it. So Scott and I have the pleasure of seeing it firsthand. We already knew unemployment was a bit of a problem going into this crisis, because I was hearing it from small businessmen like you who were saying to me, part of the problem is that we're paying people not to work all across the economy, not just through unemployment, but certainly that was one of the programs that is often pointed to by having unemployment periods be too long. We've now made that problem worse by increasing the amount of compensation. I applaud those members in the Senate that tried to stand in the way of this. Ultimately, I think they made the decision, and you saw the decision be made in the House that that it wasn't worth trying to delay the relief by fighting this fight. Ultimately, you're going to see some tough decisions like that have to be made. And so, for example, today the Senate was considering adding money to the Paycheck Protection Program. They, as I understand it, adjourned without doing that because the other side, the Democrats, were trying to get in increases in other program areas where, frankly, I don't think they're yet called for, and they may never be called for. But that's part of the imperfection of a free society and a democratically elected legislature, is that we have lots of different views out there. I hear what you're saying. I think you're exactly right. We should not have put in place unemployment compensation that exceeds what the worker gets by being employed, or even is 100% of that, because it does create this perverse incentive to not go back to work or to stay out of the workforce. And we certainly don't need that as a country. And so we're going to try to address those issues, and we'll do the best we can. Obviously, hearing you illustrate it in your business is helpful to us as we fashion our arguments for advocacy on this question. So keep us informed about that again and how it's actually impacting you. That said, I can't guarantee you what the Congress is going to do. And so that's one of the very unfortunate things about the current environment from our perspective. It's always true, but it's particularly true now. So we'll work on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And for one final question, Congressman Rose, actually from West Wilson County, the Mount Juliet Chamber of Commerce, Mark Hinesley, if you will unmute your line, you will be on.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Congressman, for joining us. Thank you, too, for your confidence that you have in the chambers and recognizing the role that chambers all across Tennessee are going to play in the recovery when it starts next Wednesday. I know many of my counterparts across the state have signed on letters of support for in the next go-round, perhaps including 501c6s in those financial assistance programs, so that chambers don't have to lay off help and can be part of hitting the ground running. I know you were aware of it, so it's more just a reminder and appreciation for what you've been able to do so far, and I hope that good things come out of
it. Thank you, Mark. Good to see you, by the way. This issue, I know from following this closely, the 501c6s being excluded was not an accident. It was a part of the negotiation, frankly, and Republicans were advocating for inclusion of chambers in 501c6s, and the other side didn't want to do that. Unfortunately, that issue was one that we lost as this bill was negotiated on the Senate side. And I think it's important to remember, and this probably was a good thing net, but the phase 3 legislation, the CARES Act, was actually fully negotiated on the Senate side. I know Scott and I and our other representatives, we were able to be involved in the discussions and the negotiations indirectly by advocating through our senators and through the Senate generally. But that's where the deal was struck. And then the House, we just approved it on our end. And so hopefully that will be the way that if the next round will happen as well. I think it will be better if it comes out of the Senate, because there's a better give and take there probably than there will be on the House side. Whether we're able to get chambers included or not in future rounds, I don't know. I think they're vital organizations and obviously impacted to the extent their members are impacted, they're impacted, and so we'll see what we can get done. I can't promise you that that's going to happen, but I think it should. And I think to the extent that we left out particular types of businesses, that was a mistake, and it is not really fair. And so hopefully we'll be able to do a better job in the next round in including all different classes of organizations out there that have been impacted by the crisis.
Thank you.
Well, Congressman and other guests and attendees on, thank you very much for your time here. That is our time, and please look for any other information from the Chamber. Get on our daily update list and stay in contact with
Bradley, if I could interrupt that 30 more seconds, and John may want this too. I think it's helpful. First of all, thank you so much for hosting these. I had the pleasure of joining the East Tennessee yesterday because of the way my districts line up, and today it's very helpful to me, and I'm sure it was to John. But I would like to remind people on the call that even though we're not in Washington and we're not always in our office, some of my district offices are open. We are standing ready for everyone's call. My DC staff can be reached through my usual office number of 202-225-6831. And I won't give all 4 of my district offices, but if you go to desjardins.house.gov, it'll have all the sites. And I know several of my staff, Shirley Pond, Cody Rhodes, Chief of Staff Richard Vaughn, Brendan Thomas, Kristen Toppin, and others were on the call listening in today. So they're taking note of all these questions. And we're in contact every day. They're calling people. So please reach out to my DC office. You may leave a recording, but that's checked frequently. And in the district, you can just call the usual district numbers. Desjardins.house.gov has those listed in Columbia, in Murfreesboro, Winchester, and Cleveland, Tennessee. And then John may want to give that same information.
Yes, thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. And so for me, johnrose.house.gov is the website that you can go to find contact information. If you want to call our DC office, the number there is 202-225-4231. Again, you can get this off of our website. Here in the district, our Cookeville office is 931-854-9430. Our staffs are ready, and we're also listening in on the call today, and hopefully can help you. And I would tell you, don't fail to avail yourself of that, because very often this is the type of things that we're able to help with the most. Is if you have an individual problem where you're not able to navigate one of these programs, very often we can help get attention to your problem, help you solve those individual issues. Thank you to the Chamber for doing this today and for the opportunity to participate.
Thanks. Great. Both of you have some of the best staffs in the country, and thank you very much. A lot of great Tennesseans working in each of your offices. So thank you, and thanks to everyone on the call. And that will be the end of our meeting. Thanks, everyone.